In the 20th century, scholars tried to analyze the Trojan War based on contemporaneous Hittite and Egyptian texts that provide a general description of the political situation in the region at the time. However, there is insufficient information about the conflicts that took place there to draw precise conclusions. Scholars note that although the Trojan War most likely took place in history in one form or another, its true nature is and will remain unknown. Hello, friends. Thank you for visiting me to watch the video and listen to the story. In this video, we will talk about the Trojan War, the history of which was passed down to us from mythology. Historians claim that the Trojan War is a disguised struggle between the Aeolian colonizers and the inhabitants of the northwestern part of Asia Minor, and the legend of a 10-year siege and the silence of Homer's Iliad about the capture of Troy indicate that in reality, the colonizers were unable to take over the foreign country for a long time. According to the hypothesis, the exploits of the Pelopons and Aeacids were invented in order to glorify their descendants, who colonized Aeolis. But although all the heroes of the tale are mythical figures, Troy is a historical city, and the Trojan War is a historical fact. The real heroes of the Trojan War were the Aeolian colonists of Lesbos and Syme, as well as the emigrants from the Peloponnesian Achaeans. They transferred this historical fact to their mythical ancestors and elevated it to a pan-Hellenic event. So, the historical cause of the Trojan War was the abduction of Helen, the wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, by Paris. When the goddess Hecuba was pregnant with Paris, she dreamed that she gave birth to a flaming brand, and that all of Troy was burned from this brand. Therefore, after Paris was born, they abandoned him in the forest on Mount Ida. He was found by a shepherd, grew up to be a strong and agile, handsome man, a skilled musician and singer. Paris was strong and brave, but the predominant traits of his character were sensuality and Asian effeminacy. The goddess Aphrodite soon directed his path to Sparta, whose king Menelaus was married to the beautiful Helen. Paris carried off Helen at night, taking with him many of Menelaus's treasures. This was a great crime against hospitality and marital law. The lawless man and his relatives, who received him and Helen in Troy, brought upon themselves the punishment of the gods. Hera, the avenger of marital infidelity, inspired the heroes of Greece to intercede for Menelaus, starting the Trojan War. When Helen had become a grown girl, and many young heroes had gathered to woo her, Helen's father, Tyndareus, took an oath from them that they would all defend the marital rights of the one who would be chosen. They were now obliged to fulfill this promise. Others joined them out of love for military adventures or out of a desire to avenge the insult inflicted on all of Greece. Having decided to take revenge on the offender, Menelaus and his brother, the king of Mycenae, Agamemnon, Atreides, travel around the Greek kings and persuade them to participate in the campaign against the Trojans. Agamemnon was recognized as the commander-in-chief of the expedition. After him, privileged positions in the army were occupied by Menelaus, Achilles, two Ajaxes, the son of Telamon and the son of Oileus, Teucer, Nestor, Odysseus, Diomedes, Idomeneus, Philoctetes, and Palamedes. Everyone willingly took part in the war, except Odysseus, who tried to avoid it by feigning madness, but Palamedes exposed him. Cinyras did not become an ally of the Greeks. Pomander and Teuthus did not participate in the campaign. Thetis tries to hide her son with Lycomedes on Skyros, but Odysseus finds him, and Achilles willingly joins the army. Lycomedes' daughter, Didomea, gives birth to Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. Consisting of 100,000 warriors and 1,186 ships, the army gathered in the harbor of Aulis, in Boeotia, in the strait separating Euboea from the Greek mainland. Here, during a sacrifice, a snake crawled out from under the altar, climbed a tree, devoured a brood of 8 sparrows and a female sparrow, and turned to dust. One of the soothsayers who was with the army, Calchas, deduced from this that the coming war would last 9 years and would end in the 10th year with the capture of Troy. Agamemnon ordered his army to board ships and reached Asia. The Greeks landed by mistake in Mysia. There was a battle in which Thersander was killed by Telephus, but Telephus himself was seriously wounded by Achilles, and his army was defeated. Then, having been carried away by a storm from the coast of Asia Minor, the Achaeans again arrived in Aulis, and from there sailed for the second time to Troy, after sacrificing Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia to the goddess Artemis. The last episode is not mentioned by Homer. Telephus, who arrived in Greece, showed the sea route to the Achaeans and was healed by Achilles. Having landed at Tenedos, the Greeks captured the island. Achilles killed Tenes. When the Greeks were sacrificing to the gods, Philoctetes was bitten by a snake. He was left on a deserted island. The landing at Troad ended successfully only after Achilles killed the king of the Trojan city of Colon, Cycnus, who had come to the aid of the Trojans. Protesilaus, the first of the Achaeans to land, was killed by Hector. When the Greek army camped on the Trojan plain, Odysseus and Menelaus went to the city to negotiate the extradition of Helen and the reconciliation of the warring parties. Despite the desire of Helen herself and the advice of Antenor to end the matter with reconciliation, the Trojans refused to satisfy the Greeks' demand. The number of Trojans, commanded by Hector, is fewer than the number of Greeks, and although they have strong and numerous allies on their side, Aeneas, Glaucus, etc., the Trojans, fearing Achilles, do not dare to give a decisive battle. Achilles kills Troilus and Polydorus and captures Lycaon. On the other hand, the Achaeans cannot take a well-fortified and defended city and limit themselves to devastating the surrounding area, and, for the sake of obtaining provisions, undertake, under the command of Achilles, more or less distant campaigns against neighboring cities. Achilles captured the island of Lesbos, see Trambalus, Thebes of Placia, the birthplace of Eetion. Among the girls captured, the most famous are Tecmessa, Sophia, and Briseis. Palamedes, with the help of Enotroph, solves the problem of supplying the army with food, but Odysseus, through deception, manages to destroy the hero. Finally, the 10th year, determined by the gods, arrives, the events of which, over the course of 91 days, are told in the Iliad. Chryses, the old priest of Apollo, comes to the Greek camp to ransom his daughter Chryseis, who was captured and given to Agamemnon as a slave. Having received a rude refusal from the king of Mycenae, he turns to Apollo with a plea for vengeance, who sends a plague upon the army. At the assembly of the Greeks, called by Achilles, Calchas declares that the only way to appease the god is to hand over Chryseis to her father without ransom. Agamemnon yields to the general demand, but in order to compensate himself for this loss, he takes away from Achilles, whom he considers the initiator of the whole intrigue, his favorite slave Briseis. In anger, Achilles retreats to his tent and asks his mother Thetis to beg Zeus that the Greeks will suffer defeats from the Trojans until Agamemnon gives him, Achilles, complete satisfaction. The Trojans immediately go out onto the plain. Agamemnon sets the next day for battle. The troops line up against each other, but instead of a battle, an agreement is made. The dispute should be resolved by a duel between Prince Paris and King Menelaus, so that the winner gets Helen and the treasures stolen from Menelaus. Paris is defeated, and only thanks to the intervention of Aphrodite does he escape death. Agamemnon insists on fulfilling the concluded agreement, but the Trojan Pandarus, famous as an accurate archer, breaks the truce by shooting an arrow at Menelaus, after which the first open battle begins. In the battle, Tydeus' son Diomedes, led by Athena, performs miracles of bravery and even wounds Aphrodite and Ares. Menelaus kills Pylaemenes, but Sarpedon defeats the king of Rhodes Tlepolemus. Intending to engage in single combat with the Lycian Glaucus, Diomedes recognizes in him an old guest and friend. Having mutually exchanged weapons, the opponents part. The day ends with an indecisive duel between Hector, who has returned to the battle, and Ajax Telamonides. During the truce concluded by both sides, the dead are buried, and the Greeks, on the advice of Nestor, surround their camp with a ditch and rampart. The battle begins again, but Zeus forbids the gods of Olympus to take part in it, and predetermines that it must end in defeat for the Greeks. The next night, Agamemnon already begins to think about fleeing from the walls of Troy. But the old and wise king of Pylos, Nestor, advises him to make peace with Achilles. The attempts of ambassadors sent to Achilles for this purpose lead to nothing. Meanwhile, Odysseus and Diomedes go out on reconnaissance, capture the Trojan spy, Dolon, and kill the Thracian king Rhesus, who has come to the aid of the Trojans. The next day, Agamemnon pushes the Trojans back to the city walls, but he, Diomedes, Odysseus, and the other heroes leave the battle due to their wounds. The Greeks retreat behind the walls of the camp, which the Trojans attack. The Greeks resist bravely, but Hector breaks down the gates, and the Trojan crowd penetrates unhindered into the Greek camp. Once again, the Greek heroes, especially the two Ajaxes and the king of Crete, Idomeneo, with the help of the god Poseidon, successfully push back the Trojans, with Idomeneo killing Asia and Ajax the Telamonian knocking Hector to the ground with a stone. But Hector soon reappears on the battlefield, filled with the strength and fortitude that Apollo had instilled in him by order of Zeus. Poseidon is forced to abandon the Greeks to their fate. They again retire to the ships. The Trojans attack, Agenor kills Clonius, and Medon is struck down by Aeneas. When the leading ship is already engulfed in flames, Achilles, yielding to the requests of his favorite Patroclus, equips him for battle, placing his own weapons at his disposal. The Trojans, believing that Achilles himself is before them, flee. Patroclus pursues them to the city wall and kills many of the enemy, including Parecmus and the brave Sarpedon, whose body the Trojans recapture only after a fierce struggle. Finally, Hector, with the assistance of the arrow-thrower Apollo, kills Patroclus himself. Achilles' weapons go to the victor, 17 raps. In the struggle for Patroclus's body, Ajax Telamonides kills Hippothous and Phorcys, and Menelaus strikes down Euphorbus. The Achaean Schedius dies at the hands of Hector. Achilles, overcome by personal grief, repents of his anger, reconciles with King Agamemnon, and the next day, armed with new shining armor made for him by the god of fire, Hephaestus, at the request of Thetis, enters into battle with the Trojans. Many of them die, including Asteropaeus and the Trojans' main hope, Hector, the burial of Patroclus, the celebration of the funeral games held in his honor, the return of Hector's body to Priam, the burial of Troy's main defender. Immediately after Hector's death, the Amazons come to the aid of the Trojans, and soon their queen Penthesilea kills Podarcus in battle, but is herself killed by Achilles. Then the army of the Ethiopians comes to the aid of the Trojans. Their king Memnon, the son of the goddess of dawn, Eos, fights bravely and kills Achilles' friend, Antilochus. In revenge for him, Achilles kills Memnon in a duel. A quarrel arises between Achilles and Odysseus, with the latter declaring that Troy can be taken by cunning, not valor. Soon after, Achilles, while trying to break into the city through the Scaean Gate, or according to another legend, during his wedding with Priam's daughter, Polyxena, in the temple of Apollo Timbrius, is killed by an arrow from Paris, aimed by the Olympian deity. After the funeral of her son, Thetis offers to give his weapons as a reward to the most worthy of the Greek heroes. The chosen one turns out to be Odysseus. His rival, Ajax Telamonides, offended by the preference shown to another, commits suicide after exterminating a herd of animals. These losses on the part of the Greeks are balanced by the misfortunes that then befall the Trojans. Priamus Helenus, who lived in the Greek army as a prisoner, declares that Troy will be taken only if the arrows of Heracles, which were in the possession of Heracles' heir Philoctetes, are brought back, and the young son of Achilles arrives from the island of Skyros. Specially equipped ambassadors bring Philoctetes from the island of Lemnos, with his bow and arrows, and Neoptolemus from Skyros. Eurypylus of Mysia comes to the aid of the Trojans, kills Machaon and Peneleus in battle, but is killed by Neoptolemus. Philoctetes mortally wounds Paris. His first wife, Oenone, refuses to heal him, and Paris dies in the mountains. Deiphobus, Paris's brother, marries Helen. When the theft of the Palladium from the Temple of Athena, successfully carried out by Diomedes and Odysseus, failed to take the city, the Greeks resorted to a trick. On the advice of Athena, Epeius, the son of Panopeus, built a gigantic wooden horse, in the entrails of which the bravest of the Greeks, under the command of Odysseus, hid. The rest of the Greeks burned the camp and sailed away from the coast of the Troad, with the intention, however, of anchoring on the other side of the island of Tenedos to await the results of the devised undertaking. The Trojans, pouring out of the city, found the horse and stopped, uncertain what to do with it. Odysseus's relative, the perfidious Sinon, announced to the Trojans that he was hiding from the Greeks, who, by the evil design of Odysseus, wanted to sacrifice him, and that the horse was built in order to appease Athena for the theft of the Palladium. He adds that an attempt to destroy the horse will bring death to Troy, and if the horse is brought into the city on the Acropolis, then Asia will come out in the struggle with Europe. The fate of the priest Laocoon, who advised to destroy the horse, convinced the Trojans of the truth of Sinon's words. Since the city gates turned out to be narrow, the Trojans make a breach in the wall and, having placed the horse in the Acropolis, dedicate it to Athena. At night, Sinon releases the Greeks who were locked inside the horse. The heroes leave the ambush and signal fires to the Greek fleet about the successful execution of the cunning plan. The Greeks, who supposedly sailed away, return and take possession of Troy. The inhabitants are partly beaten, partly taken into slavery, and the city is given over to fire and destruction. Menelaus kills Deiphobus and frees Helen. Neoptolemus kills Agenor, Politus, and Priam himself at the altar of Zeus. Diomedes kills Corybus, Cassandra's fiancé. The victors throw the child Astyanax, Hector's son, from the tower. The ancient Greeks had no doubts about the historical authenticity of the Trojan War. Even the impartial ancient Greek historian Thucydides considered the 10-year siege of Troy described in the Iliad to be a historical fact. He was convinced that the poet had merely embellished the narrative with scenes involving the gods.